The Harvest Moon Festival was the most important night of the year at Rosehaven Castle, where nobles displayed their finest silks and velvet their servants for one magical evening when social barriers seemed to blur. But when Mira, a kitchen slave, appeared at the feast wearing a dress she had sewn from scraps and cast-offs, the court erupted in cruel laughter that echoed through the great hall. What they didn't know was that beneath those humble patches lay a secret that would soon transform their mockery into stunned silence. If you love stories of hidden nobility, unexpected love, and moments when true worth shines through humble appearances, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we bring you the most incredible medieval tales every day. When Prince Alexander was required to choose a dance partner to begin the evening's festivities, every noblewoman expected to be selected. But his choice would shock the entire kingdom and reveal truths about bloodline, dignity, and the kind of beauty that transcends any fabric. Stay until the end, because what the prince discovers about the laughingstock in patches will leave you breathless, and believing in the power of seeing beyond surface appearances. The autumn air carried the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine through the corridors of Rosehaven Castle as servants bustled about in final preparations for the annual Harvest Moon Festival. This was the one night of the year when tradition permitted slaves and servants to join the celebration in the Great Hall, though everyone understood the invisible boundaries that still separated noble from common, master from servant. The festival represented a carefully orchestrated illusion of equality that would dissolve with the dawn. In the castle's sweltering kitchens, Mira worked frantically to finish her duties before the evening's festivities began. At 19, she had spent 4 years as a kitchen slave, her hands permanently stained from endless hours of preparing meals for people who barely acknowledged her existence. Her dark hair was perpetually escaping from its practical braid, and her simple brown work dress bore the accumulated marks of countless days spent over hot fires and steaming cauldrons. But tonight was different. Hidden beneath her straw mattress in the servants' quarters lay a dress she had been working on for months in secret, sewn from scraps and discarded fabric she had carefully collected and cleaned. Every spare moment between duties had been spent stitching by candlelight, her fingers bleeding from the fine needlework as she tried to create something beautiful from the cast-offs of others' wealth. The dress itself was a patchwork of different fabrics, silk remnants from a lady's torn gown, velvet from an old cushion that had been discarded, lace from a tablecloth deemed too stained for noble use. To the untrained eye, it would appear to be exactly what it was: the desperate attempt of a poor girl to create finery from refuse. But Mira possessed skills that her current station could never reveal, knowledge of fashion and needlework that spoke of an education far beyond what any kitchen slave should possess. "Mira!" barked Cook Agnes, a weathered woman whose years of service had earned her the right to command the kitchen staff. "Stop your daydreaming and finish seasoning that pheasant. The nobles will want their feast hot when they decide to acknowledge our existence tonight." Her words carried the bitter edge of someone who had learned not to expect much from the annual gesture of inclusivity. "Yes, Cook Agnes," Mira replied automatically, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she added herbs to the roasting birds. But her mind was elsewhere, imagining the moment when she would finally wear the dress she had worked so hard to create. For one night, she wanted to feel beautiful, wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen as more than just another pair of working hands. As evening approached, and the great hall filled with nobles dressed in their finest silks and brocades, Mira slipped away to the servants' quarters to change. The dress, when she finally put it on, fit her perfectly despite being constructed from such disparate pieces. The colors somehow worked together, deep blues and rich purples, accented with gold thread she had carefully unraveled from a damaged tapestry. The bodice, cut from what had once been a nobleman's doublet, emphasized her slender waist, while the skirt, pieced together from various fabrics, created an unexpectedly elegant silhouette. Looking at herself in the small, cracked mirror that served the entire servants' quarters, Mira felt a transformation that went deeper than mere clothing. For a moment, she could almost remember who she had been before circumstance and tragedy had reduced her to her current station. The dress awakened memories of silk and luxury, of dancing lessons and deportment training, of a life where beauty and elegance had been her birthright rather than her desperate aspiration. The great hall blazed with the light of hundreds of candles when Mira finally gathered the courage to enter. The space had been transformed for the festival, with garlands of autumn leaves and late-blooming flowers creating a magical atmosphere that seemed to promise anything might be possible on this one special night. Long tables groaned under the weight of elaborate dishes, while musicians played melodies that invited both noble and common to forget their usual roles. But as Mira stepped into the hall, the conversations around her began to die away, replaced by whispers and barely suppressed laughter. Noble ladies hid their smiles behind fans while gentlemen pointed with undisguised amusement at her patchwork dress. The careful construction and obvious skill that had gone into creating the garment were lost on viewers who saw only the humble origins of its materials. "Look at the kitchen wench playing dress up," Lady Catherine de Montclair whispered loudly enough for half the hall to hear. "Someone should tell her that rags remain rags, no matter how cleverly they're sewn together." Her cruel observation triggered a wave of titters and pointed comments that followed Myra's progress through the hall like a wake of humiliation. The laughter that greeted Myra's entrance felt like physical blows, each pointed comment and barely concealed smirk adding weight to the growing realization that her months of careful work had achieved nothing but public humiliation. She had hoped that the skill evident in her needlework might speak for itself, that the elegance of the design might overcome the humble origins of its materials. Instead, the nobility saw only what they expected to see, a presumptuous servant attempting to rise above her station. "Did you see how she holds herself?" Lady Eleanor whispered to her companion, loud enough for Mira to overhear. "As if wearing scraps sewn together makes her our equal. The audacity is almost amusing." Her words were calculated to wound, delivered with the casual cruelty that marked those who had never known genuine hardship or uncertainty. Mira felt her cheeks burning with shame as she made her way toward the corner where other servants had gathered, their own festival attire modest but respectable compared to her ambitious creation. Even among her fellow workers, she saw expressions of embarrassment and disapproval. Her attempt to create beauty had only succeeded in making herself a spectacle of ridicule. But from his position at the high table, Prince Alexander watched the scene unfolding with growing interest rather than amusement. At 25, he had inherited his mother's keen eye for detail and his father's ability to see beyond surface appearances. While the court saw only a presumptuous slave in a patchwork dress, the prince recognized the extraordinary skill required to transform such disparate materials into something that approached genuine elegance. The cut of the bodice spoke of professional training. The way the colors had been arranged showed an artistic eye that understood harmony and balance, and most tellingly, the way the young woman moved suggested deportment lessons that no kitchen slave should have received. Prince Alexander had spent enough time around skilled seamstresses and fashion masters to recognize expert work when he saw it, regardless of the materials employed. "The poor thing looks mortified," Queen Isabella observed, following her son's gaze to where Mira stood frozen by the servants' table. "Perhaps someone should put her out of her misery and send her back to the kitchens before this goes any further." Her suggestion carried maternal concern mixed with practical awareness of how such situations typically resolve themselves. "Or perhaps," Prince Alexander replied thoughtfully, "someone should recognize the remarkable skill required to create such a garment from discarded materials. Look at the needlework, mother. Look at how perfectly it fits her. How cleverly the colors are arranged to complement each other despite coming from entirely different sources." His defense of the beleaguered servant surprised several courtiers who overheard his words. The traditional opening of the Harvest Moon Festival required the unmarried prince to select a partner for the first dance, a choice that would set the tone for the entire evening's festivities. Every eligible noblewoman in the hall had dressed with particular care, hoping to catch the prince's eye and perhaps secure their family's political advantage through royal favor. The selection was always a matter of considerable speculation and political maneuvering. As the musicians prepared to play the opening melody, Prince Alexander rose from his seat at the high table. The hall fell silent as hundreds of eyes focused on the royal heir, watching to see which fortunate lady would receive the honor of the first dance. Lady Catherine preened slightly, certain that her family's recent financial support for the crown made her the obvious choice. Lady Eleanor adjusted her elaborate hairstyle, confident that her renowned beauty would prove irresistible. But instead of approaching any of the noble ladies who awaited his selection, Prince Alexander began walking directly toward the servants' corner where Mira stood in her patchwork dress. The hall's silence deepened into something approaching shock as the watching crowd tried to process what they were witnessing. Surely the prince was not about to break centuries of tradition by selecting a servant as his dance partner? "My lady," Prince Alexander said formally as he reached Mira, offering her an elegant bow that he might have given to any duchess or princess. "Would you do me the honor of joining me for the opening dance?" His voice carried clearly across the silent hall, making it impossible for anyone to pretend they had misunderstood his intentions. Mira stared at him in stunned disbelief, certain that this must be some elaborate joke designed to add to her humiliation. "Your Highness," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Surely you don't mean—" "I'm just a kitchen slave. My dress is made of scraps and cast-offs. Everyone is watching, everyone is." She gestured helplessly at the sea of shocked faces surrounding them. "I see a young woman who has created something beautiful from materials others discarded," Prince Alexander replied with gentle firmness. "I see remarkable skill, artistic vision, and a kind of courage that most people never possess. Your dress may be made from scraps, but it shows more creativity and talent than half the expensive gowns in this hall." His words carried conviction that transformed what might have been mere politeness into something approaching genuine admiration. The gasps and whispers that erupted from the watching crowd were audible across the entire hall as Prince Alexander extended his hand to the bewildered kitchen slave in her patchwork dress. The great hall seemed suspended in a moment outside of time as Mira stared at Prince Alexander's outstretched hand. The impossibility of the situation warred with the obvious sincerity in his eyes, creating a tension that she could feel in every fiber of her being. Around them, the shocked whispers of the nobility created a background hum of disbelief and scandal that threatened to overwhelm her completely. "Your Highness," she whispered again, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and desperate hope, "if I accept, they will never forgive either of us. You don't understand what this means, what they will say." Her words trailed off as she realized she was presuming to give advice to the future king, another breach of protocol that would only add to the evening's scandals. "Let me worry about what they will say," Prince Alexander replied with a smile that seemed to transform his entire face. "I am more interested in what you will say. Will you dance with me, despite your concerns about propriety? Will you show this hall that true nobility has nothing to do with the cost of one's clothing?" His invitation carried both challenge and invitation, offering her a choice that could change everything. The watching crowd held its collective breath as Mira slowly placed her work-roughened hand in the prince's elegant one. The contrast between them should have been absurd. The royal heir in his finest court attire beside a kitchen slave in her patchwork dress. But somehow, as they moved toward the center of the hall, the disparity seemed to fade into something approaching rightness. "I don't know the court dances," Mira confessed as they took their positions, panic beginning to overwhelm her initial amazement. "I know the steps from watching, but I've never actually—" She stopped herself, realizing that admitting to secretly observing noble entertainment was yet another transgression that could have serious consequences. "Then follow my lead," Prince Alexander said simply, his hand finding its proper place at her waist as the musicians began the opening measures of the traditional harvest dance. "Trust yourself, trust me, and forget about everyone else in this hall." His confidence was infectious, lending her strength she didn't know she possessed. As the music began and they started to move together, something magical seemed to happen in the great hall of Rosehaven Castle. Myra's body remembered lessons she had learned long ago, muscle memory awakening from years of forced dormancy to guide her through steps that felt both foreign and familiar. Her natural grace, refined by years of careful movement required for kitchen work, translated beautifully to the formal patterns of court dance. The prince, for his part, proved to be an exceptional partner, anticipating her uncertainties and subtly guiding her through the more complex passages without ever making her feel incompetent or out of place. His obvious skill and confidence seemed to elevate her own performance, creating a partnership that transcended their vastly different backgrounds and training. "You're remarkable," he murmured as they moved through a particularly intricate sequence, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Wherever you learned to move like this, whoever taught you to carry yourself with such natural elegance, they did exceptional work." His words carried questions as well as compliments, suggesting that he saw more in her performance than mere natural talent. The watching crowd had fallen into stunned silence as they witnessed something none of them had expected. The kitchen slave in her patchwork dress was not merely surviving the dance, she was excelling at it. Her movements showed training and refinement that seemed impossible given her supposed background, while her obvious comfort with the prince's lead suggested experience with formal dancing that no servant should possess. Lady Catherine's earlier amusement had transformed into something approaching outrage as she watched the graceful partnership unfolding before her. "This is intolerable," she hissed to Lady Eleanor. "That creature in her rag dress is making fools of us all. Look how she moves, how she holds herself. Where would a kitchen slave learn such deportment?" Her questions carried dangerous implications about Myra's true background. "Perhaps," Lady Eleanor replied thoughtfully, her sharp eyes studying the dancing couple with growing intensity, "we should be asking ourselves not where she learned to dance, but why she's been hiding in the kitchens when she clearly belongs somewhere very different." Her observation sent whispers rippling through the surrounding nobles as they began to notice details they had previously overlooked. The dance built toward its traditional climax, a series of turns and lifts that required perfect timing and complete trust between partners. As Prince Alexander prepared for the final sequence, he looked into Myra's eyes and saw something that made his breath catch, a depth of knowledge and experience that spoke of a past far more complex than her current circumstances suggested. "Who are you really?" he asked as he lifted her for the final turn, his voice carrying wonder rather than suspicion. "What brought you to our kitchens, and why do you dance like someone born to ballrooms rather than sculleries?" His questions hung in the air between them as the music reached its crescendo. As the final notes of the dance faded into silence, Mira found herself still in Prince Alexander's arms, their faces inches apart as the reality of what had just transpired slowly settled over the great hall. The applause that traditionally followed the opening dance was notably absent, replaced by a tension so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Every eye in the hall was fixed upon them, some showing admiration, others displaying outrage, but all reflecting the understanding that they had witnessed something unprecedented. "Your Highness," Mira whispered, suddenly aware of how improper their continued closeness must appear to the watching crowd. I should return to my place before this goes any further." But even as she spoke the words of propriety, her eyes remained locked with his, neither of them seeming able to break the connection that had formed during their dance. "Before what goes any further?" Prince Alexander asked softly, his hands still resting gently at her waist despite the growing murmur of scandal from the surrounding nobles. "Before we acknowledge that you dance better than half the court ladies? Before we admit that your patchwork dress shows more artistry than gowns that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime?" His words carried both challenge and protection, making it clear that he would not allow her to diminish herself or her accomplishments. Queen Isabella rose from the high table, her movement drawing immediate attention as she began to descend toward where her son and his unusual partner still stood in the center of the hall. Her expression was unreadable, giving no indication whether she intended to support or censure her son's shocking breach of protocol. The crowd parted before her with the automatic deference due to royalty, creating a path that seemed to emphasize the magnitude of the moment. "My dear," the Queen said as she reached them, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power tempered by genuine curiosity, "that was quite possibly the most beautiful opening dance I have ever witnessed. Your grace and skill do great credit to whoever taught you such accomplishments." Her words were chosen carefully, offering both compliment and implicit question about Myra's mysterious background. Mira sank into the deepest curtsy she could manage, her patchwork skirts spreading around her like fallen petals. "Your Majesty is too kind," she replied, her voice steady despite the overwhelming nature of the situation. "I fear I have caused a great scandal by accepting the prince's gracious invitation. Perhaps it would be best if I withdrew to avoid further disruption to the festivities." Her attempt to remove herself from the increasingly fraught situation showed both wisdom and self-sacrifice. "Nonsense," Prince Alexander interjected firmly, offering her his hand to help her rise from her curtsy. "The only scandal here would be failing to recognize exceptional talent simply because it comes wrapped in unconventional packaging. You belong in this hall as much as anyone present, and I'll hear no more suggestions to the contrary." His declaration sent another wave of shocked whispers through the assembled nobles. Lord Chancellor Aldwin, recognizing the potential political implications of the prince's public stance, approached the group with the careful diplomatic bearing that had kept him in royal favor for 2 decades. "Your Highness," he said with a respectful bow, "perhaps it would be prudent to consider how tonight's unprecedented events might be interpreted by those who wish the crown ill. Certain choices, however well-intentioned, can have consequences that extend far beyond a single evening's entertainment." The warning was diplomatically phrased but clear in its implications. The prince's selection of a servant as his dance partner could be seen as either enlightened leadership or dangerous disregard for tradition, depending on who was doing the interpretation. In a realm where political alliances shifted like sand, even seemingly innocent gestures could become weapons in the hands of enemies. "Let them interpret it however they wish," Prince Alexander replied with a confidence that surprised even his mother. "I chose to dance with the most skilled and courageous woman in this hall tonight. If that troubles those who prefer appearance over substance, then perhaps they should examine their own values rather than questioning mine." His defense was absolute, leaving no room for compromise or retreat. Mira listened to this exchange with growing amazement and terror, understanding that the prince was risking political capital to defend her honor. "Your Highness," she said quietly, "you don't understand the full cost of what you're doing. There are things about my past, about why I'm here in your kitchens, that you don't know. If those things became public—" She stopped herself, realizing that she was on the verge of revealing secrets that could endanger more than just herself. "Then perhaps," Queen Isabella said with the shrewd intelligence that had made her one of the most respected queens in recent memory, "it's time for those things to come to light. Secrets have a way of festering in darkness, but truth spoken in the open often proves less dangerous than the whispers and speculation that surround it." Her suggestion carried both invitation and command, offering Mira a chance to control her own narrative. The great hall had grown quiet again as the nobles strained to hear this increasingly fascinating conversation. What had begun as a simple harvest festival was transforming into something far more significant, a moment where hidden truths might finally emerge from the shadows where they had been carefully concealed. "My lady," Prince Alexander said gently, "whatever secrets you carry, whatever past you're hiding from, you have my protection and my family's support. But the choice of what to reveal, and when, remains yours alone." His offer was both generous and careful, respecting her autonomy while making his own position clear. The weight of decision pressed down upon Mira like a physical force as she stood surrounded by the most powerful people in the kingdom, all waiting for her response to the queen's implicit invitation to reveal her hidden past. For 4 years, she had kept her secrets buried beneath the humble identity of a kitchen slave, believing that anonymity was her only protection from forces that had once sought to destroy her completely. But now, facing the genuine kindness in Prince Alexander's eyes and the protective authority of the royal family, she felt the walls she had built around her true self beginning to crumble. "Your Majesties," she said slowly, her voice growing stronger as she found the courage to speak truths that had been suppressed for so long, "my name is not simply Mira. I am Mirabelle of Blackstone, daughter of Duke Edmund of Blackstone, who was branded a traitor and executed 4 years ago for allegedly plotting against the crown." Her revelation sent a shock wave through the assembled nobles, many of whom remembered the political crisis that had led to the Duke's dramatic downfall. The gasps and exclamations that erupted from the crowd were audible proof of the scandal she had just unleashed. The Blackstone affair had been one of the most controversial events of recent years, involving accusations of treason that had never been fully proven, a trial that many had considered suspect, and the complete destruction of one of the realm's oldest noble houses. To discover that the Duke's daughter had been hiding in plain sight as a servant was beyond shocking. "Lady Mirabelle," Queen Isabella said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of recognition and profound sympathy, "I remember you as a child at court, before the troubles began. You've grown into a beautiful young woman, though I suspect these years have been far harder than anyone so young should have to endure." Her acknowledgement served as both confirmation of Myra's identity and implicit recognition of the injustices she had suffered. King Richard himself had been drawn from his conversation with foreign ambassadors by the commotion, and now approached the group with the bearing of a man accustomed to dealing with political crises. "Lady Mirabelle of Blackstone," he said formally, his voice carrying the weight of royal authority. If you are indeed who you claim to be, then your presence here tonight raises questions that go far beyond matters of protocol and social propriety. I make no claims beyond what I have stated, Your Majesty, Mira replied with a dignity that 4 years of servitude had not been able to diminish. I am the daughter of a man you judged a traitor, reduced to slavery to prevent me from seeking revenge or reclaiming what was taken from my family. I have lived these 4 years in your kitchens, seeking nothing but survival and the hope that someday justice might be possible. Her words carried both humility and subtle challenge, acknowledging her powerless position while refusing to accept shame for her father's alleged crimes. Prince Alexander stepped closer to her, his proximity offering both protection and support as the political implications of her revelation began to sink in among the watching nobles. If Lady Mirabel's father was indeed innocent of the charges brought against him, he said loudly enough for the entire hall to hear, then we have not merely failed to protect a noble house, we have actively participated in perpetuating an injustice that reduced a duke's daughter to slavery. The prince's words carried dangerous implications that sent whispers of concern through the assembled court. Questioning the validity of the Blackstone trial meant questioning the judgment of the king himself, a position that could have serious consequences for anyone brave enough to take it publicly. Yet Prince Alexander seemed determined to pursue truth regardless of political comfort. The evidence against Duke Edmund was thorough and convincing. Lord Chancellor Aldwin interjected carefully, his diplomatic training evident in his attempt to diffuse the growing tension. While we may all feel sympathy for Lady Mirabel's circumstances, we must be cautious about revisiting settled matters of state security based on emotional appeals. His warning was clear. Some subjects were too dangerous to examine too closely. Was it thorough and convincing? Prince Alexander challenged, his voice carrying the authority of his royal birth. Or was it convenient and expedient? If we have an innocent woman serving as a slave in our own castle, if we have allowed political expediency to override justice, then we have failed in our most fundamental duty as rulers. His challenge to the established narrative was unprecedented, marking a level of moral courage that surprised even his parents. Mira watched this exchange with emotions too complex to easily categorize. The vindication she had dreamed of for 4 years was finally within reach, but she understood the enormous political risks that Prince Alexander was taking on her behalf. Your Highness, she said quietly, you don't need to fight my battles for me. You've already given me more kindness and recognition than I dared hope for. Please don't endanger yourself for the sake of old injustices that may be impossible to remedy. Some injustices demand to be remedied, Queen Isabella said firmly, her voice cutting through the growing murmur of political speculation. If we have indeed wronged this young woman and her family, then we have a moral obligation to investigate and, if necessary, to make amends. The integrity of the crown depends upon our willingness to acknowledge and correct our mistakes, not upon our ability to conceal them. The Queen's support for further investigation into the Blackstone affair created a new dynamic in the hall, transforming what had begun as a simple dance selection into a potential re-examination of one of the realm's most controversial political cases. The kitchen slave in her patchwork dress had become the catalyst for questions that could reshape the kingdom's understanding of justice and accountability. If your majesties are truly willing to examine the evidence against my father, Mira said with growing confidence, I can provide information that was never presented at his trial, evidence that was suppressed or ignored in the rush to find a convenient scapegoat for more complex political problems. Her offer carried both hope and danger, promising revelations that could vindicate her family or destroy her completely. The great hall had transformed from a festive celebration into something approaching a court of justice as the implications of Mira's offer settled over the assembled nobles. The revelation that new evidence might exist regarding the Blackstone case created an atmosphere charged with political tension and anticipation. King Richard found himself facing a choice between maintaining the status quo that had served his reign well and pursuing a truth that might prove uncomfortable but ultimately strengthening to his legacy. Lady Mirabel, the king said with the careful formality that marked important state occasions, if you possess evidence that was not presented during your father's trial, then honor and justice demand that it be examined. However, you must understand that reopening this case will subject you to scrutiny that may prove as dangerous as the original accusations were to your family. His warning was both practical and protective, acknowledging the risks inherent in challenging established narratives. "I understand the dangers, Your Majesty," Mira replied with a steadiness that impressed everyone present. "But I also understand that my father died believing his honor would never be restored, that his name would remain forever associated with treason and betrayal. If there's a chance to clear his reputation and reveal the truth about what really happened, then any personal risk is worthwhile." Her courage in the face of potential consequences marked her clearly as her father's daughter, possessing the same integrity that had ultimately led to his downfall. Prince Alexander moved to stand beside her, his physical proximity making his support unmistakably clear to every observer in the hall. "Father," he said with respectful but determined formality, "I propose that we convene a formal investigation into the Blackstone matter, with full royal authority to examine all evidence and question all witnesses. If Lady Mirabel's family was wrongly accused, then justice demands their vindication. If they were guilty as charged, then a thorough investigation will only confirm the righteousness of our original judgment." The prince's proposal was politically astute, offering a path forward that could serve justice while protecting the crown's reputation regardless of what the investigation might uncover. His willingness to risk personal embarrassment for the sake of truth demonstrated a maturity and moral courage that surprised many who had dismissed him as merely another privileged royal heir. "Such an investigation would require careful handling," Lord Chancellor Aldwin observed, his political instincts recognizing both the opportunities and dangers inherent in the prince's suggestion. The Blackstone case involved accusations against several prominent nobles who remain influential at court. Reopening these matters could destabilize relationships that have taken years to rebuild. His concerns were valid, reflecting the complex web of political alliances that governed court life. "Then perhaps," Queen Isabella interjected with a wisdom that had made her such an effective partner in governance, "it's time to discover whether those relationships are built on truth or merely on convenient silence. A monarchy that cannot bear honest examination of its decisions is a monarchy that has already lost its moral authority to rule." Her words carried a philosophical weight that elevated the discussion beyond mere political calculation. Lady Catherine de Montclair, who had remained silent during the increasingly dramatic revelations, finally found her voice to express the concerns that many nobles were feeling but had been afraid to articulate. "Your Majesties," she said with careful deference, "while we all admire the compassion you've shown toward this young woman, we must consider how reopening the Blackstone matter might be perceived by our enemies. They could interpret such actions as weakness, as uncertainty about our own judgment and authority." "Our enemies," Prince Alexander replied with a confidence that surprised even himself, "are more likely to respect rulers who choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. Strength lies not in refusing to examine our decisions, but in having the courage to correct them when they prove to have been wrong." His response marked a clear philosophical stance that would likely guide his eventual reign. Mira listened to this debate about her family's fate with a mixture of hope and terror, understanding that the next few minutes could determine whether her 4 years of hidden suffering would be vindicated or whether she would face consequences even worse than those she had already endured. "Your Majesties," she said when the discussion paused, "the evidence I possess includes letters that were never found during the original investigation, correspondence that reveals the true source of the accusations against my father and the reasons why certain parties wanted him destroyed." The mention of previously unknown letters sent another wave of excitement and concern through the watching nobles, many of whom were now calculating whether they might be implicated in whatever revelations were about to emerge. The festival celebration had become completely forgotten as everyone present realized they were witnessing events that would likely reshape the political landscape of the entire kingdom. "Where have these letters been hidden for 4 years?" King Richard asked with the practical curiosity of someone accustomed to evaluating evidence. "How can we be certain of their authenticity, and why have they remained secret until now?" His questions were reasonable, reflecting the skepticism that any ruler would apply to such dramatic claims. "They were hidden by my father's most trusted steward, who managed to preserve them even when our estates were searched and confiscated," Mira explained. "He has kept them safe, waiting for a time when presenting them might serve justice rather than simply endangering more innocent people. That time has come, but only if your Majesties are truly committed to pursuing truth regardless of where it might lead." The challenge implicit in her words was clear, She was asking the royal family to risk political stability for the sake of justice, to choose moral courage over safe expediency. It was the kind of choice that defined reigns and determined how history would remember those who made it. "Send for these letters," King Richard declared with the decisive authority that had marked his most successful decisions. "Let them be brought here tonight, examined by all parties, and evaluated openly before this court. If they prove authentic and exonerating, then Duke Edmund of Blackstone will be posthumously pardoned and his daughter restored to her rightful position. If they prove false or insufficient, then this matter will be settled once and for all." The king's decision sent a final wave of shock through the great hall as everyone present realized they were about to witness either the vindication of a wrongly accused noble house or the exposure of an elaborate deception that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. The hours that followed would be remembered as among the most dramatic in the castle's long history. Master Geoffrey arrived with the letters that had been hidden for 4 years, their seals intact and their contents preserved exactly as they had been on the day Duke Edmund was arrested. As the documents were examined by torchlight in the great hall, with nobles and servants alike watching in breathless anticipation, the truth about the Blackstone affair finally emerged from the shadows where it had been carefully concealed. The letters revealed a conspiracy orchestrated by Lord Commander Blackthorne and several ambitious nobles who had seen Duke Edmund's growing influence as a threat to their own power. The accusations of treason had been carefully fabricated, supported by forged documents and coerced testimony from witnesses who had been threatened with their own destruction if they refused to cooperate. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, painting a picture of corruption and manipulation that shook the very foundations of trust within the court. "My God," King Richard said quietly as he finished reading the final letter, his face pale with the magnitude of what had been revealed. Edmund of Blackstone was not only innocent of treason, he was actually working to expose the very corruption that ultimately destroyed him. "We didn't execute a traitor, we executed one of the most loyal and honorable men in our kingdom." His admission carried the weight of profound regret and the recognition of a terrible injustice. Prince Alexander turned to Mira, who stood quietly beside him as the truth of her father's innocence was finally acknowledged by the crown. "Lady Mirabelle," he said with deep emotion, "no words can undo the suffering you've endured these past 4 years, but please know that your father's honor has been completely restored. He was everything you believed him to be, a loyal subject who died defending the very crown that condemned him." The transformation in the great hall was immediate and profound. Nobles who had laughed at the kitchen slave in her patchwork dress now bowed respectfully to the vindicated daughter of Duke Edmund, their expressions reflecting shame at their earlier cruelty and amazement at the courage she had shown. The dress that had seemed so ridiculous hours earlier was now recognized for what it truly was, a testament to noble spirit that could create beauty and dignity even in the darkest circumstances. "Your Majesty," Mira said, her voice strong despite the tears flowing down her cheeks, "I ask for justice not just for my family, but for all those who suffered because of Lord Commander Blackthorne's conspiracy." The letters name other victims, other families who were destroyed to protect the guilty. Her request showed the same sense of justice that had marked her father's character, thinking of others even in her moment of personal vindication. King Richard nodded gravely. "Justice will be done, completely and publicly. Lord Commander Blackthorne and his co-conspirators will face trial for their crimes, their victims will be compensated for their losses, and measures will be put in place to ensure such corruption cannot take root again in our court." His promise carried the authority of absolute royal decree. Queen Isabella approached Mira with the grace that had made her beloved throughout the kingdom. "My dear child," she said gently, "you are no longer Lady Mirabelle of Blackstone, you are Lady Mirabelle of Blackstone, Duchess in your own right, with all lands and titles restored to you. More than that, you have shown a strength of character that honors not just your father's memory, but the very best traditions of our nobility." The formal restoration of her titles and properties marked the completion of Myra's transformation from kitchen slave to duchess, but it was Prince Alexander's words that truly captured the meaning of the evening's events. "You came to this feast in a dress made of scraps," he said, taking her hand before the entire court. "But you've shown us that true nobility has nothing to do with the cost of one's clothing and everything to do with the content of one's character." 6 months later, the kingdom had witnessed the most significant judicial reforms in its history. The corruption exposed by Myra's courage had led to widespread changes in how trials were conducted, how evidence was preserved, and how noble families could be protected from false accusations. The Duchess Mirabelle had become one of the most respected figures at court, her voice carrying special authority on matters of justice and reform. "Do you ever regret it?" Prince Alexander asked one evening as they walked together through the gardens of her restored estate. "The years of hardship, the suffering you endured, the risks you took to reveal the truth?" They had grown close during the months of investigation and reform, their partnership in pursuing justice blossoming into something deeper and more personal. "Never," Mira replied without hesitation, her hand resting comfortably in his. "Those years taught me things about strength and survival that I could never have learned in comfort. They showed me who I really am beneath the titles and privileges of birth. And they led me to you, to this moment, to the opportunity to help build a more just kingdom." Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had experienced both the heights and depths of human existence. "Then perhaps," Prince Alexander said with a smile that had become precious to her, "we should be grateful for the laughter that greeted your patchwork dress. Without it, without your courage to wear it despite knowing you might be mocked, none of this would have happened. Your dress didn't just make you beautiful, it changed the course of our entire kingdom." The patchwork dress itself had been carefully preserved, displayed now in the castle's gallery as a symbol of how true worth can shine through humble appearances and how courage to be authentic can transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations. The kitchen slave who had been laughed at for her creative needlework had become a duchess whose voice carried the power to reshape justice itself. Their wedding 6 months later was celebrated throughout the kingdom as the union of two souls who had found each other through the courage to see beyond surface appearances to the nobility that lives within the human heart. The bride wore silk and jewels befitting her station, but many guests remembered most clearly the patchwork dress that had started it all, proof that sometimes the most beautiful garments are those sewn with hope, worn with courage, and recognized by those wise enough to see beyond the superficial to the substance beneath. The court that had once laughed at a slave's presumption now celebrated a love story that proved true royalty lies not in the accident of birth, but in the choice to act with honor, courage, and compassion regardless of the cost.